subscribe and leave a comment below. What is the creepiest family secret you have discovered? Serious. My cousin Eric died of AIDS-related cancer. He never told anyone about a partner, and he died essentially with no contact with anyone outside of his family. I was maybe 8 when he passed, and I don't think I met him more than once. He was only in his 20s. My grandma had 6 children. I always thought my oldest uncle looked and acted different from the rest of the siblings. When I was 24 I found out he didn't share the same father as the rest of them. But that isn't the juiciest part. His real dad is my grandpa's brother. My grandfather had a literal crazy aunt who lives in the attic. His father's sister had some sort of mental illness, and they were apparently worried about how that would look for the family, so they locked her in the attic of his boyhood home Jane Eyre style and basically just kept her fed and otherwise ignored her. I found out about this when he briefly mentioned it a few years ago, like it was an entirely normal thing to do with a family member. After my uncle died of a heart attack a few years ago, it came out that he was the leader of a 6 cult thing. His wife and 5 kids had no idea, and I think his wife is still in denial. Whenever his kids go to clean off the grave, at least initially, I don't think it's happened lately, there are usually 6 toys on it that they have to throw away. Not super creepy, but definitely a crazy curveball. My aunt and uncle had their oldest daughter lobotomized because she was probably a bit mentally ill, was very combative with them, and was in her teens and becoming interested in sex. This was in the late 1960s. My father never spoke to his brother again over this. We had no contact with them whatsoever. When I was growing up, my mom and dad told me what happened a couple of years ago. My dad once found a mummified human foot just chilling in a trunk in his basement. My grandfather was an orthopedic surgeon who was stationed in New Guinea during WW2, and by all accounts, was never quite the same after the war. Our best guess regarding the foot is that it belonged to one of his patients and either had some sort of abnormality my grandfather found interesting, or he was just super proud of the amputation job he did. My dad and his buddy, who were 12 or 13 at the time, naturally decided that the best course of action was to hang the foot from the front porch of the girl they were crushing on. And apparently no one in town batted an eye over it other than thinking it was a good prank. My grandma and her 9 siblings are very close. So when they each got a call saying a family member had died and they had inherited a large sum of money, they thought it was a scam. Turns out their very strict and religious father had a secret affair and an additional child, Mary. Well, Mary, now in her 80s, had passed away, so had her husband. They had no children, so the closest relatives were my grandma and her siblings. And that's how 10 religious people in their 70s and 80s learned their dad had cheated on their mom, and they had a half-sister they never got to meet. A few years ago one of my dad's cousins did one of those DNA kits. A few weeks later she was contacted and told that there were several close relatives in their database that aren't listed on the family tree she made. It turns out that my great-grandfather faked his death in a life insurance scam and then started a new family on the other side of the country. He never got in contact with my great-grandmother or his children with her, my grandfather and his sister. It kinda of crazy because he only passed away a few years before this all came to light. That my grandpa was a drug addict and was eventually cast out of the family. My aunt woke up one night to find him in the house talking to a real estate agent. He snuck in and tried to sell their house while they were asleep. He also double mortgaged their house, so he got basically all my nan's income. When my nan tried to move the family away from him, she realized she had almost no money due to this. Bank director said it was okay because men are supposed to control the bank account. She was stuck there because of him, and he was leeching off their money and there was nothing she could do about it. My father's parents both died in the 90s. Around 5 to 10 years ago I did a 23andMe test, mostly for kicks and to look out for any health issues. Last year I was contacted by someone through the service who was trying to find blood relatives because both of her parents had been adopted as infants and we had a pretty strong genetic connection. Long story short, my grandfather had an affair in the 1950s and fathered twins. My aunt and uncle were pretty floored to find out they have half siblings. My father died 4 years ago from suicide, so he never knew. To get even weirder, my mother grew up with these twins after they had been adopted. She was friends with my father's half-siblings decades before she married him. My mom told me this over dinner a few years back like it was no big deal. When I was 6, my grandma mother's side wanted me to sleep over at her place for the weekend. It's noteworthy that she never really liked me. I remember her as a cold witch 6-year-old brain. Her housekeeper was nicer to me than she was. My mom said no, she wouldn't let me sleep over at her mom's. Granny got really angry, saying something along the lines of "you will regret this." So she didn't hear from her for a while and went to the house to check up on her. Granny had suicided herself with sleeping pills. Here is where it gets creepy. My mom found her diary and her last entry were things like, "Granddaughter is rotten, needs to be killed, and it's her job to do so." My name was in her calendar for that weekend. Basically my grandma wanted to kill me when I was 6. I'm really glad my mom trusted her gut and said no to the deadly sleepover. Edit. Wow. Thanks for all the feedback. 2,5k upvotes. Just wow. I'm trying to answer your questions as best as I can. Edit 2. Thanks for the silver. Edit 3. Evil was the wrong word. Changed it to rotten instead, which is more fitting. My grandfather from my mother's side died way before I was born. I was always told that he fell off the balcony and died. A year or two ago I found out what really happened. When I was I think 13, my mom was telling the story to my uncle's girlfriend. While my mom, uncle's GF and me, we are sitting at the table. I was just minding my business while my mom was whispering to my uncle's GF. At some point I heard my mom tell something about her dad, and I started listening to what she was saying. She explained that her dad was an alcoholic and could be pretty abusive at times. When he got drunk, he would sometimes threaten to kill himself. On the night before my mom's birthday, after he put her and her siblings to bed, he got drunk and threatened to throw himself off the balcony. He stood on the edge of the balcony, on the other side of the fence thing, can't remember what it's called in English, sorry. My grandma tried to calm him down and to get him safe inside. It worked. My grandfather calmed down, but instead of getting inside, he accidentally let go of the fence and fell off the balcony. He probably thought that if he landed in a correct way he wouldn't break too many bones or something, so he tried to move while in the air. It didn't work, and he died. So yeah, when my mom woke up the next morning, on her birthday, her father was dead. Some details may be wrong. It's been, like I said, a year or two ago since I heard this story, and frankly I'm too timid and kinda scared to ask my mom the whole story again, because it'll always be a sensitive topic. My grandmother was addicted to those speed diet pills in the late 1960s and had a collection of wigs that she used to impersonate other people to pick up their prescriptions. Edit. Since this got so many likes, I thought I'd add to the story. She had gone through a lot in life by that point. Her mother died when she was 6, and her dad remarried 6 months later to a woman who used to starve her and only let her eat leftovers. She married at 17 to a man in his late 30s to just get out of the house. Her husband, my grandfather, committed suicide in 1961 when my mum was only 1 year old, leaving her alone with very little money and 4 kids. She had wigs because she lost her hair in the aftermath of her husband dying from stress. She still had them when I was a kid in the 90s, and I used to wear them for fun. Although I didn't learn about their true purpose until a long dinner on a family holiday many years later. She told her entire life story from the start, and every detail has stuck in my mind. She stopped the pills cold turkey when she saw the police at the house of one of her neighbors, one of the women she'd been impersonating. It scared her straight. To look at her later in life, you would never have guessed she went through anything. The diet pills weren't even the end of it. She had a rough time with the menopause later on. Got pregnant in the early stages, which then sent her a bit off kilter, and she was sectioned because she kept sticking her head in the oven, and the doctors didn't properly understand why at the time. She was the sweetest little old lady you'd ever meet, although she had a wicked dry sense of humor. All of my best memories growing up were with her. I was always the awkward weird gay kid, and she let me be myself, be creative, dress up. She was honestly my best friend. She died surrounded by her family in 2014 in her 80s. My grandpa, my mother's father, killed his first wife. My great-grandmother tried to kill my grandma, my mom's mother, several times when she still was a child. My mom had an affair with her sister's husband. My dad got killed because of a wrecked car. I'm pretty sure my grandfather killed my grandmother. This is based on the fact that women rarely use a gun for suicide, that the whole family subsequently fled the state leaving everything they owned behind because they were in such a hurry, that there had been domestic violence in the marriage, and that my grandfather traveled separately and left his daughters with his mother for a while, I'm assuming, so he'd be harder to track. Back then you could escape the law by crossing state lines pretty easily, but the family story was that she killed herself. I always thought I was born of an affair between my parents, who were both married to other people at the time. Last year, my grandmother told me that in fact, my dad and his first wife wanted a son, but had a daughter. They tried to buy my mom's son, my older half brother, from her, but my mom wouldn't sell. Instead, they agreed to give my mother $10K to have another baby. The deal somehow fell through after my dad had gotten my mom pregnant. My dad went to prison and got divorced from his first wife, and the first wife tried to steal me from the hospital. Don't forget to subscribe and share your story in the comment.